Last time we introduced buyers and sellers in the same environment. We said we want to understand where prices come from. And we had introduced the supply curve as a way of capturing the costs and the preferences of sellers. We said as prices go up, using this hypothetical supply curve, quantity supplied also goes up. This simply follows the law of supply. On the buyer's side, we had buyers who are following this demand curve. And when we plug in prices into the demand curve, we get the answer to the question, how much are people willing to buy at this price, at a price of 10? At a price of 10, this led to a surplus. Spinach sellers bring a total of 40 units to market. Spinach buyers only want 10. So there's what we call a surplus. There's a bunch of spinach left over at the end of the day. And in this market, only 10 units are actually exchanged. It's the minimum of the quantities applied and quantity demanded, quantity exchanged. So when there's a surplus, spinach left over at the end of the day, buyers have an incentive to undercut the price, to buy the leftover spinach at the end of the day. And sellers will accept this offer, lowering their price. When we lower the price, we actually leads to a reduction in the surplus in the market. So we can continue lowering our price, but if we overshoot, we have what we call a shortage. If the price is too low, then the number of units that are brought to market is very low. So the quantity supplied is low. And we can ask how much spinach is demanded from buyers by plugging in a price of 4 into the demand curve. And this gives us a quantity demanded of 40. So 40 people want spinach, only 10 units are brought. The quantity exchanged in this market is the minimum of these two values. It's 10. And there are 30 people left over who are unable to get their spinach. In this environment, we see lines out the back of the farmer's market waiting for spinach. Molly has a huge line. A buyer at the end of the line may be clever and try to jump the line and offer a higher price. If Molly, is willing to accept this, it would be in her interest to do so. She would receive a higher price, let's say a price of 5, from these undercutting or upcharging buyers, and both buyer and seller would walk away better off. In the process, the shortage would go down because the quantity supplied at the higher price would now be greater, and the quantity demanded at this higher price would now be smaller. So shortage would be lower. So in all of these examples, we wanted to change the price. But there's one price where no one wishes to change, and that's when quantity supplied is equal to quantity demanded. We denote this with P star to represent the price that makes this happen, and Q star to denote what we call market clearing. This is our equilibrium condition, and we can visualize it very succinctly by placing the supply curve and demand curve on top of each other in this way. So we have the price quantity graph with our supply curve and our demand curve. Equilibrium, our market clearing condition, where everything that's brought to market is sold to a buyer. Our Q star happens at this intersection. P star is simply the price that makes it happen. At this point, no buyer nor seller wishes to change their price or wishes to change their quantities. Everyone is effectively happy with the situation. This is what we call equilibrium. One question that remains is how happy buyers and sellers are with this result. And what we're going to show in this video is actually one of the biggest results in economics. It's also one of the most misunderstood. So to remind ourselves that the vertical bars between the price line and the demand curve represent the consumer surplus for each one of these exchanges. I've simply plotted vertical bars here. It's a visual reminder that we're measuring the distance between willingness to pay from the demand curve and what you're actually paying with this price line. We have vertical bars representing consumer surplus, and we have vertical bars representing producer surplus. So again, this is the vertical bars are here to be a visual reminder that we're adding up the difference for each one of the exchanges. And the difference is how much the seller has to, the cost of production for each one of these units, and how much they're receiving. So we want a high price and a low cost for the seller. Okay, so these are areas, and we talked about representing consumer surplus and producer surplus geometrically. What we're going to talk about for the rest of this video is essentially, can we do better than we could in equilibrium? This is a nice large area, but we're wondering, is this the best price we can do? Is there a price we could set that would improve sort of the sum of these two areas? Can we improve consumer surplus plus producer surplus by using a different price? Or is this the best we can do? Okay, so the way we're going to do this is by thinking about a type of government policy. We're going to effectively answer the question, how good markets are. This is what we call welfare analysis, the study of the benefits of markets. So we're going to use two different price controls, which are essentially just government price restrictions. So the first one is what we're going to call a price ceiling. Just like in a room where the ceiling is above you, the room is below the ceiling. So we're going to set a legal interval of prices. We're going to say prices are legal as long as they don't go above $5. And this $5 is what we call the price ceiling. So in this environment, let's just run a hypothetical price and see what the incentives of buyers and sellers push us towards. So at a price of $4, we have a quantity demanded of 40, simply by taking the price, plugging it into the demand curve. So you could do this on your own sheet of paper. And then we could do the same thing for sellers. So we plug in that price of 4 into the supply curve to give us quantity supplied. In this environment, we have a shortage. There's too much wanted and not enough brought. And we have a shortage of 30 units. So we know what happens when there's a shortage. We have incentives from buyers to raise prices, and we have incentives from sellers to raise prices as well. So we're going to push as close as we can towards equilibrium while keeping our prices legal. And we push as close as we can towards equilibrium, and that leads us to run into the boundary of the price ceiling. So in this case, we go from a price of 4 to a price of 5, and then we get stuck. We can't raise our prices any further. So in this environment with a price ceiling, we always end up with a shortage as long as the equilibrium price is not legal. This is what we call a binding price ceiling, where the equilibrium price is not legal. Okay, and in this environment, we can think about how good this market is, how much welfare is generated. So on the seller side, all we have to do is think about the quantity exchanged, how much is actually being exchanged, which is 15, and then figure out these vertical bars for all of the units that are exchanged, the difference between their willingness to sell, their marginal cost, and the price they're receiving. And then on the buyer side, we can do the same thing. We look at all of the exchanges that are actually happening, which is 15. 15 things are being bought because 15 things are being sold. There's nothing else to buy. And we look at the vertical bars between the price and the demand curve to give us this area here. You can see this is not a triangle. Consumer surplus is not always a triangle, and neither is producer surplus. In this case, it's a trapezoid. But using the visual reminder that these are differences for each one of the things that are actually exchanged, this allows us to think clearly about consumer surplus in this environment. Okay, so it turns out there's a bunch of exchanges and surplus value to be had that we're not actually taking advantage of. The price is so low that we've created a shortage, and there are things that we might value more than cost that we would want to exchange, and that we actually could exchange in equilibrium if we were to allow prices to end back at 7. But because we've restricted the price, we've created a shortage, and we've missed out on some opportunity for welfare. This is what we call deadweight loss. It's this missed opportunity for exchanges. And there are sort of more technical ways to think about deadweight loss, but sort of an intuitive way of thinking about it is that it's a loss of surplus value for society as a whole. So we're either missing out on consumer surplus or producer surplus or both. So we've missed out on some surplus value in this environment, and we can eliminate this deadweight loss by raising the price ceiling to a point where the equilibrium price of 7 is now legal. So we've fully eliminated the deadweight loss, raising the sum of producer surplus and consumer surplus by allowing equilibrium to be legal. Okay, so this is on one side. There's no deadweight loss in competitive markets like this when there are no externalities. So if the price is too low, we generate deadweight loss. But what happens if the price is above equilibrium? If we use what we call a price floor. So just like with a price ceiling, we're saying the room, the legal prices, are above the floor. So the floor is the legal minimum price. So let's start off with a price of 11, and we'll plug this into our demand curve, and that's going to give us a quantity demanded of 5, and we plug it into the supply curve to give us a quantity supplied of 45. And of course, just like we've done before, this leads to a surplus. So there's too much spinach brought to market because the price is very good for sellers and very bad for buyers. So in this environment, sellers have an incentive to offer discounts, and buyers would love a discount. So just like before, buyers and sellers push us as close as we can towards equilibrium while remaining legal. So because the legal minimum price is 10, we get stuck here and we can't sort of go any further. So the conclusion here is that a binding price floor, binding meaning that the equilibrium price is not legal, this creates a surplus. So surplus is generated from a price floor. Okay, so let's think about welfare again. How good is this market? So on the seller side, we need to look at all of the exchanges that are taking place, find the difference between the supply curve and the demand curve. So each one of these vertical bars sort of visually reminding us that we're adding a vertical distance for all of the things that are exchanged. And then we just add up this area. So like consumer surplus was before, this is a trapezoid. And then we can do the same thing for consumer surplus. We look at all of the things that are actually bought and sold. And we find the difference between the demand curve and the price for each one of these things. Okay, and again, just like with a price ceiling, a price floor generates a deadweight loss. There's an area where we could have had surplus value, either consumer surplus or producer surplus or both, but we're missing out on it because the price is too high. So if we were to lower the price and allow equilibrium price to be legal, then we could actually capture that deadweight loss, increasing our total surplus for buyers and sellers. The area of surplus value would have gone up. Okay, so again, we've shown that there's no deadweight loss when equilibrium is a legal price in competitive markets with no externalities. I'm going to keep returning to this idea. Okay, so this leads us to what we call the first welfare theorem of economics. We say competitive markets that have no externalities maximize welfare. And welfare is what we've been talking about with producer surplus and consumer surplus. It's essentially the sum of producer surplus plus consumer surplus at this point. It gets a little more complicated as we go through, but for now, that's our definition. Competitive markets are markets where we have something like spinach, where it's a thing that you can buy from many people. You have many buyers who are interested in buying the thing. So no one buyer and no one seller has the ability to move prices around. And then we also have externalities here. We're saying we maximize welfare when there are no externalities. An externality is just a cost or a benefit to people outside of those doing the exchanges in the market. So if, for example, I buy gasoline and I burn it in my car, I'm releasing carbon dioxide into the environment, which is a cost to people who are not me or the oil company. So this is an externality, a cost that's borne by society that I don't have to pay directly. So in environments where there are, we have competitive markets and we have no externalities, markets actually do as good as we can. There's no way of improving them, which is a pretty incredible result. You sometimes hear economists talk about the invisible hand of the market. Everyone following their own incentives leads us to the best outcome for society. That's what this thing is telling us. That this is the result people are quoting when they talk about the invisible hand of the market. But it doesn't make the claim you often hear people mention on television. We're not saying in every environment the market is as good as it gets. We're saying in some environments that's true. It's true in environments where there are competitive markets. Whenever there's a monopoly, for example, we don't have many sellers. So monopolies, this result doesn't apply to. And the market for gasoline is certainly not an environment where this first welfare theorem applies, because there are externalities. So this is a powerful result. It tells us in some cases markets are as good as it gets. But this is not a universal claim. And this is often gotten wrong in popular culture. This is a limited result, but a powerful one. All right, so we'll leave this here. In the next video, we're going to talk about what we call comparative statics, which is essentially how prices change.